All right, so moving on into Chapter 4. So Chapter 3, again, it was an incomplete story. All we were getting was what happens to supply and demand and what's the proper verbiage to use when describing supply and demand. Now, Chapter 4, we finally get to put the two pieces truly together and say, how does this affect price and quantity, which is the stuff we really care about, right? I mean, supply and demand, those are just sort of made-up stuff by economists. What we know about is the price and the quantity. So start telling us about the real stuff. Okay, well, so what we want to know is how does a change in supply or demand change price and quantity? And again, please realize that this is the causal effect in economics. It's not the other way around. Price and quantity does not change supply and demand. It's that supply and demand change price and quantity. Okay, that's relatively fundamental, that's the way you think in an economics class. All right, so one of the first things we do is say, okay, assume that we are somewhere near equilibrium, right? It doesn't have to be right on it, but we've gotten somewhere close. So imagine that we're looking at the widgets market, because I don't want you to have a preconceived notion about any sort of a market that we're talking about, right? So widgets are completely made up baloney stuff, all right? Now, when an economic and one of these 10 things change, you have to be able to tell me what's going to happen to price and quantity because of that change. That's your goal, right? Because that's really what an economist does, is they predict what's going to happen to price and quantity. So that's your goal. Now, the four-step process. The nice part about it is that you can really limit all economics into these 4 steps more times than not. All right? The first step is to tell me what happens to supply or demand, right? So what we were doing back there in Chapter 3 where we said either supply or demand went up or down, that's always your first step, okay? And again, that's why back in Chapter 3 I was telling you, don't go past that, right? It's your natural inclination to do it, but stop, right? Because that's always the first step. Now, based on that change of supply and demand, your next step is to say, that one of the two of these is going to start happening. You're either going to start seeing a shortage or you're going to see a surplus. And again, the reason why is that we're currently at equilibrium. We're pretty close to equilibrium. The amount that we're making is being bought and sold pretty quickly, right? When one of these things changes, that relationship quits, all right? When there's a shortage, what always follows? If there's a surplus, what always follows? The cool thing about step 3 is that you already know what it is as soon as you write step 2, okay? The only thing you can do in step 3 that will piss me off is if you tell me that there's a shortage and then the price falls. That's really the only way that you can miss that point, right? Because if you're wrong on number 2, I can, sometimes you may screw that one up. But if you say after a shortage the price rises, that part of it is okay, right? So the only thing you can screw up in step 3 is crisscrossing these arrows. So don't, okay? And these make sense. You guys know when there's a surplus that there's going to be a sale. Please don't tell me that a sale means the price goes up. Okay, and then the last thing that you do after that is, and this one we'll spend a little bit of time, is you have to then tell me what happens to quantity. Because again, the two things that we want to know about are price and quantity. So in step 3, you tell me what happens to the price. In step 4, you tell me, essentially then, what happens to quantity, okay? Step 1, you know how to do. That's chapter 3. What I'm going to show you is how to get to step 2. Step 3, you now know, because the step is always the same. based on what step 2 was. And then we'll talk a little bit about step 4. So really, this 4-step process, technically, you already know 2 of the steps. Okay? So it's not, it's just got to learn 2 new things in this chapter. That's not too bad. All right, so let's go through the 4-step process. All right, so if we are at or near equilibrium, where's the price right now? This is what our current price is. Okay, so make sure when you're trying to analyze these things that you start with your current price. And I strongly encourage using a different color for your price. Don't have to, but you want pretty pictures, not just good ones. Right? All right, so I'm just going to make up an example to start with. So there's not even going to be an economic event for you to analyze. I'm just going to tell you flat out demand increased. Right? I could have made some baloney thing up here about how demand grew, but I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to tell you that demand increased flat out. All right? Because you can do chapter 3. You've demonstrated it. So you did chapter 3 and said demand is going to increase. Okay. Now, when you go to your next step, you basically have to determine, is there a shortage or a surplus when demand increases? People are buying more stuff. What do you expect? Shortage. When there's a shortage, what always follows? Thank you. All right, and here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Okay. Step 4 is really the hard one. We want to see how does the quantity change because of this price rising. Now, normally, when we look at things and we say the price goes up, normally what are we going to say happens to quantity? Goes down. Because what are we normally? Buyers, yes. Normally we are buyers. So oftentimes, as soon as we see this, we say, oh, quantity is going to go down. But the question is, in step 4, are you analyzing it as a buyer or as a seller? That's the question you have to ask yourself, okay? And the way you figure that one out is by going back up to step 1 and saying, what did we use in step 1? Who are the demanders? Buyers. In step 4, use the opposite person. Sellers. When the price goes up, what do sellers do? So here, the quantity supplied will increase. Because the sellers are seeing the extra demand out there and saying, oh, good, there goes the price. Crank up my supply, right? Start calling my workers and tell them, hey, guys, that 40-hour week, nah. I need you to do 45, right? For as long as this demand is inflated, I'm going to crank the supply up, right? Because I want to meet the demand that's out there. And that's exactly right. So the key here, or for me the key is, these are the words, okay? I would like you to be able to do the words. I would also like you to be able to do the modeling, okay? If you don't know the walk, it's, you put one foot across the parallel of the other foot, so this is what makes your butt move the way it's supposed to when you're modeling. It works! So if you're worried about whether you have the model right, remember what you have to do to model properly. Okay, that's maybe not quite working too well, but the idea here is demand increased. What do you do model-wise when your demand increases? You move your demand curve to the right, right? Okay, so with a separate color, you say, here's where demand is moving. Where is my new equilibrium? Well, what is equilibrium? Well, but define it. What is equilibrium?
Supply and demand.
Intersect, right? Well, we've gotten rid of our old demand and we've made a new one. Where does that demand curve? Yeah, it's right here, right? This is where my new demand curve hits my supply curve. At this point, what price are we at? Here's our new price. What did we say was going to happen to price? It was going to go up. At this point, how is the quantity compared? Here's where our quantity used to be. Where is it now? To the right, it increased. We said that our quantity was going to increase. You have just now taken the model and agreed with the words. And the cool part about it for me is that when I think about this stuff, I don't even think about all these words. I mean, the words to me are great, but really the picture is what does it for me. Because I look at this point and say, okay, great, I have one equilibrium. Here's my new one. What's going to happen to price and quantity? All right? The four-step process is nice because it has verbiage that backs up the picture. But the picture, if you draw it the right way, you can jump to the answer in one step, right? By drawing a new demand curve in your graph, you know. Okay? So you would be able to tell me price is going to go up and price and quantity is going to go up as well. And the cool part about it is that whenever the price goes up, what do you always have to have had? So you could always tell me that there was a shortage and the price went up, the quantity went up. Period. Right? Okay. So those are our steps. Now, let's suppose that my first step changed to, instead of demand increasing, let's suppose that it was supply increasing. And this time, instead of doing the words first, let's do the picture first and see if we can create the words from the picture. And again, I strongly encourage you to get your first initial equilibrium point, right? If you like to draw the little lines that tell you where price and quantity are, great, do it. But if those confuse you, if more of these little dashed lines floating around make your graph look messy and you just don't get it, don't. You don't have to, okay? So in this case, step one is supply increases. So what do I draw? A dashed line with the other left. Except now we move the supply curve because I said that supply increases. So I say, here's my new supply curve. And let's shift to green. And now I say, where did that new supply curve hit my demand curve? It's down there. Step 3 always talks about price. Is our price higher or lower now? Lower. So step 3, is that price falls. What always causes a price to fall? What did I say? It starts, surplus begins. And then the last thing we have to do is to say what happens to quantity. It increases. Perfect. That's step 4. And if we wanted to be technically correct, we started with supply, so quantity demanded increases. So technically, if we wanted to be a little bit picky, it's the quantity demanded that is increasing because of that fall in the price. So here's how you can do steps 2 through 4 if you do step 1 correctly using the picture instead of just using the words. Now, the word definitions works the same way, right? If you think about it. When supply increases, so suppliers are making more, what happens when the suppliers are making more? There's a surplus. Oh, okay. What always follows the surplus? Sales. Price falls. Well, if the price falls, we were looking at it from the supply side, so now we look at it from the demand side. When the price falls, what do we as buyers do? We buy more. Same thing, okay? Whichever of those techniques works better for you, great, use it, okay? Do realize that you're going to have to be able to do both of them, though, okay? But whichever one you start with, that's cool. Start with that one. Just make sure that whichever way you move to agrees with it, right? So if you told me that price falls and quantity increases, but you draw this picture, I will be sad. All right? So again, this is how much you need to know graphing to be able to compare where one intersection is to where another intersection is. That's it. The graphing gets. We will never get any deeper than that. And sort of the cool thing about it is that we will be doing this over and over and over and over again. We will just change the setting slightly, right? Because right now we're talking about price and quantity in a market. Then we'll start talking about prices and quantities in all markets added together. Aggregately, we'll start talking about inflation versus GDP. We'll start talking about the value of US dollars versus the value of Japanese yen to talk about exchange rates. All of these things are comparing price and quantity, right? That's the basis. That's why this is so crucial, because everything we're going to do afterwards, there's going to be different words, but the ground level of it is still going to be price of something, quantity of that something, right? That's why when you miss this part, right, you know, you shot yourself in the foot, except you probably missed and hit your knee first and then went through your foot, right? I mean, because you're really hobbled, okay? So not getting this is really bad. Right? So this is why I spend a little bit more time on chapter 3 and 4 than I do on some of the other chapters, because it's crucial. Because if you miss this, then I honestly don't know what to tell you lots of times. Okay, so are you ready to try a real one? Where I give you an economic event and then you tell me? Whew, here's what's going to happen. Okay, again, try and put away your preconceived notions and start with that. All right. Okay, so what do we want to study? Okay. What? Water bottles. Okay. So we are analyzing the water bottle market. It's going to be a long afternoon. Okay, so the economic event that you read about is water bottle workers form a union and get a 20% pay raise. And And I want you to tell me what's going to happen to the price and quantity of water bottles. Now, before you jump to a conclusion, be careful. All right. So, is this going to affect demand or supply? So, is it income? Is everyone in the country getting a pay raise of 15? Oh, crap. Then it can't be income.
It's part of the resource cost.
Resource costs? Wait, what's a resource? Or land, labor, capital. Please don't forget that resources are land, labor, and capital. The cost of your labor is going up by 20%. That's the same as saying the cost of buying the materials to produce a water bottle went up by 20%. They're all part of your resources that you have to spend as a supplier, okay? Again, this is talking about the supply side of things, the seller's side, right? So this, when the cost of your workers goes up, what do you do as a supplier? Don't jump to price. What do we always do first? We are going to produce less. We have to, right? Because we don't have as much money to pay all of these people. So instead of having them work an 8-hour day, what are we going to tell them? Fine, we'll give you a 20% raise, but you now all work 7 hours a day instead of 8. They're still going to basically get the same take-home pay, but now you've basically given them an extra hour of vacation, right? I mean, wouldn't you appreciate that if that was your job? Same sort of thing. But if you're only working 7 hours, what happens to production? In theory, it goes down, right? So our response is always step 1. Due to higher resource costs, supply falls. Okay, so which way do you want to do this one? Do you want to do this one where we do the words or we do the picture? Well, we're going to do both, but which one do you want to go first? Want to go with the picture first? Okay. Here's our price. Here's our quantity. We're talking about water bottles. Okay, so what do I do when I say that supply falls? Move it to the left. And please make sure you move supply to the left, because that's what you said changed. So, supply shifts to the left. And again, remember what you're trying to compare. You're comparing this point to this point. Just comparing the two intersections. That's all you're ever going to do. And remember, when you're analyzing the graph, technically you get to jump straight to step 3, because step 3 will determine step 2 for you. What happened to the price? So we know that price. What always makes the price rise? Always, right? And you will come up with lots of synonyms for the word start, begin, ensue. Right, fall, rise, exactly. You get all that, right? All right. The only slightly tricky part, and the cool thing about it is that technically here, what happened to the quantity? Again, remember quantity is going, so did we shift right or left? So we went down, right? So here we would say quantity falls. But remember, what did we start with? supply. So what did we end with? Demanded. Carrots are good for you. You'll be able to see better. All right, so this is your goal, right? Okay, so let's see. All right, so another one. Do you want to stay in water bottles, or do we want to go somewhere else? Stick with water bottles? Okay. Let's see. So the economic event. So we, as a company or as an association, start an ad campaign that states water coming out of our water bottles tastes better because we don't use, whatever those 3 letters are that stand for something bad. It's like, is it BPAs or HGHs or something? Whatever. There's some chemical that in some plastics is very bad for you if you ingest it, right? It's actually extremely bad for you. And in fact, what they say is that when you microwave plastic containers with this chemical in it, it actually seeps into the food you have in there, and it's doubly bad for you. So trying to convince people that when they microwave their stuff, they should always use glass or ceramic instead of plastics, because some plastics have this nasty thing in it, right? But we don't do that. Oh, no, right? We are much better. We would never poison our clientele. If we do, we won't tell them. Okay. So, because of this, right, what happens? Demand goes up. What's causing our demand to go up? Tastes and preferences, right? So, due to tastes, preferences, due to taste preferences, increases our demand. All right, let's just analyze this one from the word perspective this time, and then we'll draw the graph afterwards and agree that it makes sense. So that was step 1, demand increases. Do we get a shortage or a surplus when demand increases? People are buying more of our stuff. What happens? There's a shortage. What always follows a shortage? Price rises. We started with demand. What are we going to end with? Supply. When the price goes up, what do suppliers do? They happy dance, right? And the quantity supplied rises. Okay, so those are our words. Now let's draw the picture and make sure that the words agree with our picture. What happened in step 1? Shift the demand to the right. Here's our new point. Here's our old point. What happened to our price? Went up. Good. What happened to our quantity? Went up. Cool.
When you first explained it, I was really thrown off, and now that you use the example, I like it.
Good. Now, compare this answer to what we did on the very first example with widgets when I said demand increases. note, it doesn't matter what market you're working in, folks. When the demand goes up, everything happens the same. I mean, you change the words, right, because it's water bottles versus widgets, and those are totally different things, right? No, they're not. To an economist, all it is what happens to supply or demand. And so you can either have supply or demand, and it can either go up or down. So there's 4 different cases you have to remember. And basically, those 4 different cases, just rinse and repeat. That's all there is to it. So once you've done one of all 4 of them, you've already done it once. Okay, so let's try one more. And again, like I said, whichever one you like better, the model or the words, start with that. And then just make sure that you can make it agree in your own brain. All right, so are we still in water bottles? Okay. So let's see. Our event this time is the U.S. enters a recession. People have been screaming about it happening again real soon for who knows how long. Okay. Normally, when you have a recession, what happens to us? We stay home, we lose our jobs. What happens then? Where does it fit into these categories? Incomes, right? Because if you have a job, they're going to say, well, there's a recession starting. I could probably hire you to come in and do your job. You're going to have to take a pay cut, right? Or there's lots of unemployment out here. In order to save this state, we need to, force teachers to pay an extra 6% of their salary in their retirement every month, right? Because that's what we need to do to save the state. Right? So you take a pay cut. Welcome to my life. Anyways, so the U.S. enters a recession. So your first step 1 response is, due to recession, incomes will fall. Incomes fall, and so will demand. And what do I need to put in there afterwards? But this one's income. What do I always have to say when I talk about income? Normal. So is this normal or inferior? Normal, because they're both going the same way, right? When they both go the same way, it's normal. When they go opposite directions, they're inferior, right? So when you make less and you buy less, that's normal, right? So will demand due to water bottles being a normal good. So please, whenever you say incomes, because of a demand change, you need to clarify that it's either normal or inferior, okay? That will be, on a quiz I probably won't complain about it, but on a test you probably miss one for not telling me that it's normal or inferior, okay? Okay, so when demand falls, do we have a shortage or a surplus? Buyers are buying less. Surplus. Got to use a different word every time, folks. Right. All right, what always follows a surplus? Sale. And again, please don't tell me that a sale means the price goes up. I had someone write that. And then last but not least, what did we start with? What are we going to look down here? What do suppliers think when the price falls? Oh. Quantity supplied falls. There's 2 L's in falls. And again, make sure the graph agrees. Sorry, the model agrees. Do realize that step 1 is kind of crucial. And again, that's why I focused so hard on chapter 3, because if you screw up step 1, guess what happens to step 2, 3, and 4? So don't screw up step 1. So this time, demand fell. Please make sure you shift demand properly. Here's where we were. Here is where we are. What happened to the price? Went down. Good. What happened to the quantity? Went down. Good. Okay? All right. That's about half of chapter 4, folks. We only go to 2:30, right? 2:30. 2:30. All right, so no homework for this weekend since we didn't quite get through chapter 4. If you are so inclined, if you would like to start looking at the homework, it will be questions 2 and 8 in chapter 4. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is remember what you did on question number 6 back in chapter 3? Redo every question back on number 6, A through I, except instead of telling me just what step 1 is, give me everything. So through A through I, tell me, because of this event, what happens to price and quantity instead of just what happens to supply and demand. So again, if you want to get started on that one, strongly encourage redoing question number 6, except do it like for all 10 parts. It gets a little, that's why you might want to get a head start.
What were the questions in
2 and 8. Yeah. No, 2 and 8 are reasonable because number 6 is not. Again, though, please remember, it's the question from chapter 3. Just do it like this instead of just telling me what happens to supply and demand. I'll grade it by next week. Joe, can you turn me off? Well, I know you want to do it right.